Welcome, everyone. A special, warm welcome to all our Oromo-speaking friends joining us today. We are so glad you're here. Today, we're unpacking a truly powerful, foundational spiritual study. We're looking into striving for spiritual unity, or as it's called in the original text, Tokkummaa, Hafuuraa. Now, right off the bat, the source material makes one thing absolutely crystal clear. Spiritual unity, whether that's in your church, your community, or your own home, isn't just some nice optional add-on if we feel like it. It is a fundamental, mandatory requirement. So let's dive right into this evidence and explore exactly what that means.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this down into 3 distinct chapters. First, we'll look at the biblical foundation of unity. Second, we'll face the uncomfortable reality of the obstacles to unity. And finally, we'll talk about overcoming those barriers to bring about real spiritual restoration.
Chapter 1. The Vision. This is all about the biblical foundation and the incredible benefits of unity. Because again, unity is not just a nice suggestion. It's a powerful, divine mandate that gives us immense collective strength.
Now you might be wondering, where does this mandate come from? Well, let's look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. The text says, "Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit." Just let that sink in for a second. It's highlighting the absolute oneness of our faith, our baptism, and our God. It establishes this beautiful theological harmony that we are called to protect.
The source material brings this to life with a really powerful contrast. On the left side here, we have a classic cultural anecdote about 3 bulls, one black, one white, and one brown. The story goes that the moment they separated and divided, they were easily picked off and eaten by the enemy. That is the ultimate vulnerability of division. But then, look at the right side. We see the power of unity in the biblical story of Nehemiah. By working together as one, they built the entire wall of Jerusalem in just 52 days. Literally, it was such an unstoppable display of unity that their enemies were completely stunned.
And that brings us to Psalm 133, verses 1 and 2. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard. It's such vivid, poetic imagery, right? The oil running down Aaron's beard is this ancient symbol of absolute divine blessing. It just resonates with this deep sense of peace and grace that only comes when we are truly united.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the tangible fruit of that unity. When we are united, we get God's direct presence. Matthew 18 tells us He's right there when 2 or 3 gather. We become an unstoppable collective force. And if you look at Acts chapter 2, when the early church shared everything they had in complete unity, they experienced this miraculous daily growth and overwhelming shared joy. It was literally a game changer for their entire community.
Chapter 2. The Obstacles. So, we've seen the beauty of unity, but now we need to shift gears a bit and get deeply reflective. We have to identify the barriers to harmony. We need to dissect the spiritual diseases that actively tear our communities and families apart.
The source text identifies 4 specific major obstacles. We're looking at satanic division, or seisana, pride and arrogance, which is anuma or aftuluma, jealousy, known as hanafa, and tribalism, or sanyuma. It's so important to understand that these aren't just bad human habits or little personality flaws. These are active, destructive spiritual barriers that we absolutely must recognize and confront together.
Let's start with the first one, satanic division, or seisana. The text explains that Satan specifically targets unity. He doesn't want peace. His primary, active spiritual work is literally sowing hatred and scattering people, whether that's breaking up families, splitting churches, or dividing entire nations. Division is his ultimate tool for destruction.
Next up is pride, or aftulama. This is that intense self-centeredness that actually acts as Satan's trap. The study points to 3 John chapter 1, giving us the example of Diotrephes. This was the guy who just loved to be first. He was so arrogant and so desperate for personal elevation over the community that he actually expelled other believers from the church. It's a perfect illustration of how arrogance directly causes a community's spiritual downfall.
Then we have jealousy, or hinafa. The source material calls this a completely useless spiritual disease that simply destroys lives. And it includes this shocking anecdote to prove the point. There's a story of a jealous man who asked God to blind one of his own eyes just so his neighbor would suffer double blindness. Can you believe that? It's completely irrational, destructive envy. It's the exact same spirit we see way back in Genesis with Cain and Abel. It just ruins everything it touches. And the fourth barrier is tribalism or sanyuma. So the crucial point here is that tribalism elevates our earthly, fleshly ties and nepotism way above our common spiritual root in Christ. When we prioritize our tribal or ethnic ties over pure spiritual unity, we completely forget our shared divine origin. We literally forget who we really are in God's eyes.
So, seeing all this darkness, what do we do to overcome these barriers to unity? How do we actually fix this? That is the big question, right? But the good news is, we are not left without an answer. We can pivot from conviction to real spiritual empowerment.
This brings us to Chapter 3, the action. These are the practical, spiritual steps to overcome those barriers and restore harmony. It's time for the spiritual reset that our families and congregations so desperately need.
Let's move to and see how this builds. The source text gives us 3 highly practical, grace-filled action steps: self-reflection, daily spiritual renewal, and radical forgiveness. Let's walk through exactly how each of these works in our daily lives.
Step 1 is self-reflection. True unity actually starts with understanding our own identity. We have to recognize that every single one of us is made in God's image. Because of that, there is absolutely no room for feeling superior to anyone else, and there's no room for feeling inferior either. We are all on level ground before God.
Step 2 is daily renewal. We have to present ourselves to God every single day to avoid spiritual drift. It's absolutely crucial to maintain a daily lifestyle of confession and intentionally drawing near to God. If we just kind of coast and start drifting away, our flesh naturally takes control, and that's when those barriers we talked about start creeping back in.
And step 3 is radical forgiveness. Now listen, holding a forgiving heart is not optional. It is the absolute bedrock, a mandatory foundation of our faith. The text makes it very clear. Refusing to forgive literally breaks our unity. In fact, when we refuse grace and hold on to bitterness, we're actually aligning ourselves with the enemy's work of division rather than with God. We have to choose forgiveness.
We'll wrap up with this incredible quote from Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. It's so powerful. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. What would our communities, our churches, and our own families actually look like if we truly lived out this radical, undivided identity every single day? It's a real game changer. Think about that and let it inspire you. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey today.